I never thought I'd sell the house. Not like this, anyway. For 62 years of my life, that old Victorian on Maple Street was more than just four walls and a roof. It was home. It held every memory worth remembering. Raising my kids there, hosting holiday dinners, even dancing in the living room with my late husband Jack when we thought no one was watching. But now it feels like a weight I can't carry anymore. When I decided to move to Boston to be closer to my daughter, Emily, I figured I'd have help packing up. After all, I'm not exactly spry enough to lug furniture around these days. So I called my son Michael, who lives in Chicago. "Oh, Mom," he said, his voice tinged with guilt. "I'm swamped at work right now." Then I reached out to friends from church, neighbors, even Emily herself. But everyone had an excuse. No one showed up. Not a single soul. That's when the anger started bubbling inside me. If they couldn't bother to help, why should I stick around? The real estate agent came by the next week, and before I knew it, the house was sold. A young couple bought it. Tech people, probably, judging by how quickly they offered full price. As I signed the papers, I felt a strange mix of relief and betrayal. Relief because I wouldn't have to deal with the endless repairs or lonely nights in that big empty house. Betrayal because nobody cared enough to say goodbye. On impulse, I booked a flight to Ireland. Why Ireland? I don't know. Maybe because I'd always dreamed of going but never did. Or maybe because I wanted to disappear for a while. Either way, I packed 2 suitcases, withdrew some cash from the sale, and left without telling anyone where I was headed. When I landed in Dublin, I rented a tiny cottage near Galway. On my second day there, I wandered into a farmer's market and met Fiona O'Connell, a spirited woman with laugh lines etched deep into her face. She invited me for tea, and somehow, over scones and jam, I found myself spilling my guts about everything. The house, my so-called family, and how utterly alone I felt. Fiona listened to my rant without interrupting, nodding occasionally as if she'd heard similar stories before. "You've been carrying too much for too long," she said finally, pouring me another cup of tea. "Sometimes letting go isn't weakness, it's survival." Her words stuck with me, though I wasn't ready to admit she might be right. Still, something about Fiona's calm demeanor made me feel less invisible than I had in months. As the days turned into weeks, I settled into a routine. Morning walks along the cliffs, afternoons helping Fiona tend to her garden, and evenings reading by the fire. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel obligated to take care of anyone else. But beneath the surface, resentment simmered. How could my own children abandon me like that? My mind kept circling back to their excuses, replaying them over and over until I convinced myself they didn't deserve my forgiveness, or my presence. One afternoon, Fiona took me to a local pub where she introduced me to Seamus Byrne, a gruff but charming man who ran a used bookstore down the road. He greeted me with a raised eyebrow and a dry comment about Americans being overly dramatic. I shot back with a quip about Irishmen being overly rude, and to my surprise he laughed. We struck up an unlikely friendship, bonding over our shared love of books and sharp tongues. Seamus had a way of cutting through my defenses, not gently but effectively. One evening, as we sat in his shop surrounded by dusty shelves, he asked point-blank why I was so angry. "Because they left me," I snapped. "My family, my friends, they didn't lift a finger to help. And now I'm here halfway across the world pretending I don't care." Seamus leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Pretending," he repeated. "That's the problem, isn't it? You do care. Too much." Seamus's words haunted me for days. You do care. Too much. The problem was he wasn't wrong. I cared so much it hurt. Every unanswered call, every ignored text. It all piled up inside me like bricks in a wall I couldn't climb over. But instead of letting myself feel vulnerable, I doubled down on my anger. Anger was easier. Anger kept me safe. Still, doubt crept in at odd moments. Like when Fiona showed me pictures of her grandchildren, beaming with pride. Or when Seamus talked about his late wife, his voice softening just enough to make me wonder if forgiveness was possible, even after years of pain. One night, as I stared out the window at the Irish countryside bathed in moonlight, I picked up my phone and scrolled through old photos of Emily and Michael as kids. They were smiling, their arms wrapped around me. Back then they needed me. No, not so much. My throat tightened, but I shoved the feeling away. No sense crying over spilled milk, or ungrateful children. Meanwhile, back in the States, chaos erupted. Unbeknownst to me, Michael hired a private investigator to track me down. Apparently, Emily had been calling everyone she knew, trying to piece together clues about where I'd gone. When they finally traced me to Galway, they bombarded me with texts and voicemails. At first, I deleted them without listening. What could they possibly say that would change anything? But one message slipped through before I could block it. A shaky voicemail from Emily. "Mom, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "We're worried sick. Just tell us you're okay. Please." For a split second my heart softened. Then I remembered all the times she hadn't answered my calls, all the holidays I spent alone because she was too busy. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. If they wanted to find me, they'd have to come here themselves. And honestly, I hoped they wouldn't. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. How dare they act concerned now? Where were they when I needed help moving furniture or sorting through decades of memories? It was too little too late. So I decided to teach them a lesson, one they wouldn't forget anytime soon. I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and paper and started writing letters. To Michael, I wrote about how disappointed I was that he couldn't take time off work to help his own mother. To Emily, I described the loneliness I felt during Christmas last year when she canceled our plans at the last minute. And to both of them, I announced that I was donating nearly all the money from the house sale to charity. Let them see what it feels like to be left with nothing, I thought bitterly. After sealing the envelopes, I mailed them off, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. Justice served. For a few days I basked in the aftermath of my revenge. Locals in the village praised me for my generosity when word spread about my donations. Fiona even joked that I should run for mayor. But beneath the surface, guilt gnawed at me like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. It hit hardest one evening when Seamus stopped by with a bottle of whiskey. "Heard you've been making waves," he said, raising an eyebrow. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Just doing what needs to be done." He poured us each a glass and studied me for a moment. "And how does it feel?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. Truthfully, it didn't feel great. Sure, there was a fleeting rush of power, but now I mostly felt hollow. Seamus nodded as if he already knew. "Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die," he said. His words lingered long after he left, leaving me restless and uneasy. I never expected them to show up at my door. Not really. But there they were one rainy afternoon. Emily clutching a bouquet of wilting flowers, Michael looking like he hadn't slept in days. I stood frozen in the doorway, torn between slamming it shut and letting them in. "Mom," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. They followed me into the tiny living room, dripping rainwater onto the wooden floor. For a moment no one spoke. Then Michael cleared his throat. "We got your letters," he began, his tone cautious. "What you said, it hit hard." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We're sorry, Mom. Truly. We messed up. But please don't shut us out like this." Their words should have made me feel vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, they only deepened the ache in my chest. I crossed my arms tightly, refusing to let them see how much their presence rattled me. "It's too late for apologies," I snapped. "You had your chance." The argument that followed was ugly. Michael tried to explain how overwhelmed he'd been juggling work and his crumbling marriage. Emily admitted she'd been battling depression, too ashamed to reach out for help, even from me. But none of it mattered. Not to me. All I could focus on was the years I'd spent putting them first, only to be cast aside when I needed them most. "You think saying sorry fixes everything?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Where were you when I needed you? Where were any of you?" The room fell silent except for Emily's quiet sobs. Finally, Michael stood up, his jaw clenched. "Fine, Mom. If this is how you want it, fine. But don't act like you're the only one who's suffered." With that, he stormed out, leaving Emily behind. She stayed a few minutes longer, pleading with me to reconsider, but I wouldn't budge. When she finally left, slamming the door behind her, I sank onto the couch, exhausted. Victory tasted bitter. Fiona found me later that evening, sitting alone in the dark with a glass of wine. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me and waited. Eventually, she broke the silence. "So they came," she said gently. I nodded, staring into the empty fireplace. "And now they're gone." Fiona sighed. "Do you feel better?" Her question caught me off guard. Did I? I wanted to say yes, to convince myself that cutting them out of my life was the right thing to do. But the truth was I felt worse than ever. Seeing their faces, hearing their voices, it stirred up memories I'd buried long ago. Memories of laughter, of hugs, of unconditional love. Love I thought I'd lost forever. I don't know, I admitted quietly. Fiona placed a hand on mine. Maybe it's time to stop punishing them and yourself. The next morning I went to Seamus's bookstore under the pretense of returning a novel I'd borrowed. He saw through me immediately. "Come to hide again?" he asked, arching an eyebrow. I scowled. "No. Just needed some air." He chuckled and handed me a cup of tea. "You're running out of places to run, Nana." His bluntness stung, but he wasn't wrong. As we sat among the dusty shelves, he told me about his own estrangement from his daughter after his wife died. "I pushed her away because I couldn't handle the pain," he confessed. "By the time I realized my mistake, it was almost too late." His eyes softened. "Family isn't perfect. They disappoint us, hurt us, drive us mad. But they're still family. And once they're gone," he trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. I stared into my tea, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to wonder, what if I was wrong? The day after my conversation with Seamus, I found a letter tucked under my door. It was from Emily. My first instinct was to throw it away unread. After all, what more could she possibly say to justify herself? But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the envelope looked slightly damp, as if she'd cried while writing it. Or maybe it was the tiny doodle of a flower in the corner, a habit she'd had since she was a child. Whatever it was, I opened it. Inside, Emily poured out her heart. She wrote about the shame she felt for ignoring my calls, for prioritizing her career over our relationship. She admitted that she'd been avoiding me because she didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like a failure. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she wrote. "I failed you. But please don't give up on me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to dismiss them, to tell myself she was just trying to manipulate me. But deep down I knew she meant every word. Still, I couldn't bring myself to respond. Not yet. A week later, Michael showed up unannounced. He looked worse than ever. His suit wrinkled, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. I invited him in reluctantly, bracing myself for another round of excuses. Instead, he handed me a stack of papers. A legal document detailing his financial struggles. "I lost my job," he confessed, sitting heavily on the couch. "And the house. I can't keep up with the payments. That's why I didn't come when you called. I didn't want you to see me like this." His admission stunned me. All this time I'd assumed he was too busy or indifferent. But the truth was far more complicated and far more painful. I stared at the papers in my hands, conflicted. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand why he hadn't trusted me enough to share this sooner. Another part of me felt an ache I hadn't felt in years. The urge to protect him, to fix things the way I used to when he was little. But instead of offering comfort, I simply nodded and told him to leave. As he walked out the door, I realized I might have made a terrible mistake. Fiona had always been patient with me, but even her patience had limits. One afternoon she cornered me at the market, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "You're destroying yourself, Nana," she said bluntly. "And you're hurting people who love you. When are you going to stop?" Her words stung, but they weren't wrong. I'd spent months wallowing in anger and self-pity, convinced I was the victim in all of this. But now, faced with Emily's letter and Michael's confession, I wasn't so sure anymore. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Apologize. Pretend everything's fine." Fiona shook her head. "No. But maybe it's time to start listening instead of lashing out. Maybe it's time to let go of the past and figure out how to move forward." Her advice echoed in my mind long after she left, leaving me restless and uneasy. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received a call from Emily. Her voice was frantic. "Mom, it's Michael," she said, barely holding back tears. "He's in the hospital. It's bad." Panic surged through me as I scrambled to book a flight back to the States. On the plane, I replayed every harsh word I'd ever said to him, every moment I'd pushed him away. What if it was too late to make amends? When I arrived at the hospital, Emily greeted me with red-rimmed eyes. "He collapsed at work," she explained. "They think it's stress-related, but—" she trailed off, unable to finish. As I sat by Michael's bedside watching him sleep, I noticed something on the nightstand, a framed photo of the three of yous taken years ago. We were smiling, happy, whole. It was a stark reminder of everything I stood to lose if I didn't change. And for the first time I allowed myself to cry, not out of anger but out of fear and regret. Michael's condition stabilized after a few days in the hospital, but the toll his collapse had taken on him, and on our family, was undeniable. Sitting beside his bed, I found myself apologizing for the first time in years. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking. "For everything." He blinked at me, surprised, then gave a weak smile. "It's okay, Mom. We both screwed up." Later, Emily joined us, and for the first time in months we talked. Not shouted, not accused, just talked. We shared stories about how much we missed each other, how lonely we'd all been. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, tears, and awkward silences. But it was a start. As I watched them interact, I realized how much I'd underestimated their pain, and how much I'd contributed to it. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Back home, I began sorting through old boxes I'd stored in Michael's garage after selling the house. Among the clutter, I stumbled upon a shoebox filled with letters addressed to me, but they weren't from anyone I recognized. Curious, I opened one and froze. The handwriting belonged to Jack, but the tone was unfamiliar. In the letter, he confessed something that shattered me. He'd once considered leaving me. The revelation hit me like a freight train. According to the letters, Jack had felt trapped in our marriage during a particularly difficult period when I was consumed with raising the kids and caring for my aging parents. He'd written these letters as a way to process his feelings but never sent them, choosing instead to stay and work through our issues together. Reading them now, years after his death, left me reeling. Had I been so focused on being everyone else's rock that I'd neglected the man who meant the most to me? The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the clarity it brought. Maybe I wasn't the victim I'd always believed myself to be. When I returned to Ireland weeks later, Fiona and Seamus could tell something had shifted in me. Over tea, I told them about the letters and the guilt I carried, not just for pushing my children away but for failing to truly see Jack when he needed me. "We all make mistakes," Fiona said gently. "What matters is what you do next." Seamus nodded, adding, "Sometimes forgiveness starts with forgiving yourself." Their words resonated deeply, but they also forced me to confront another painful truth. I'd pushed them away too. My obsession with revenge and my refusal to let go of the past had strained even these new friendships. That evening, I apologized to both of them, promising to try harder, to listen, to be present, to stop punishing others for my own shortcomings. To my relief, they accepted my apology, though I knew rebuilding trust would take time. As the weeks passed, I threw myself into repairing the relationships I'd damaged. I visited Emily more often, helping her navigate her ongoing battle with depression. With Michael, I worked to rebuild a connection that felt less transactional and more genuine. Slowly but surely we began to heal, as individuals and as a family. But the road to redemption wasn't easy. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments when I questioned whether I deserved their forgiveness. One night, sitting alone by the fire, I reflected on everything that had happened. I realized that life isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about learning from them. And sometimes, that means carrying the weight of those mistakes forever. The anger I'd clung to for so long had finally loosened its grip, replaced by a quiet sadness tinged with hope. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. I wanted to be better. For them, for Fiona and Seamus, and most importantly for myself. Months had passed since Michael's hospitalization, and while things between us weren't perfect, they were better. Emily called me more often, sharing snippets of her life instead of just checking in out of obligation. Michael even invited me to his new apartment for dinner. A modest place but cozy. Sitting at his table, watching him laugh as he recounted stories from work, I felt a flicker of the warmth we used to share. But beneath the surface, cracks remained. There were still moments when old wounds resurfaced. When Emily snapped at me during an argument, or when Michael hesitated before asking for help. I couldn't blame them. Trust takes years to build and seconds to shatter, and I'd done my fair share of breaking it. Still, I held on to the hope that time would heal what I'd damaged. If not completely, then enough to keep us tethered together. One crisp autumn morning, Fiona came to visit with news that caught me off guard. She was moving back to Sweden to care for her aging mother. "It's time," she said simply, sipping tea in my kitchen. Her announcement left me speechless. Over the past year, Fiona had become more than just a friend. She'd been my anchor, my confidant, The person who reminded me that forgiveness starts with letting go of anger. I'll miss you, I admitted, blinking back tears. She smiled softly. And I'll miss you too, Nana. But remember this, life is short. Don't waste another moment holding on to grudges or guilt. Her words stayed with me long after she left, echoing in my mind like a mantra. That night, as I packed away the last of Jack's letters, I realized how much I'd changed since coming to Ireland. I wasn't the same woman who'd arrived angry and bitter. I was softer, wiser, and infinitely more aware of how fleeting happiness could be. A week later, Seamus stopped by with a bottle of whiskey and a somber expression. "I've got something to tell you," he said, settling into the armchair by the fire. My stomach clenched. I knew that tone. "It's cancer," he continued matter-of-factly. "Stage 4. Doctors say I've got maybe 6 months if I'm lucky." His revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. For all his gruffness, Seamus had become family to me, a steady presence in a world that often felt chaotic and cruel. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice trembling. He shrugged. "Didn't see the point. Life goes on whether you're ready or not." We spent the evening talking about everything and nothing, laughing through tears as he shared wild tales from his youth. Before leaving, he handed me a book, one of his favorites. "Read this," he said. "It's about finding meaning in the mess." As he walked away, I realized he'd given me one last lesson. Even in loss, there is love and beauty. The following spring, I returned to Galway for Seamus's funeral. Standing beside Fiona, who'd flown in from Sweden, I felt the weight of mortality pressing down on me. Seamus had lived fully, unapologetically, embracing both joy and sorrow with equal grace. His death reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Life isn't measured by the mistakes we make, but by the connections we nurture and the love we leave behind. Back in Boston, I sat on Emily's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Michael joined us, carrying mugs of hot cocoa. For a moment, none of us spoke. We simply existed together, bathed in the golden light of evening. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes that's enough. As I looked at my children, I thought about all the pain I'd caused and all the love I'd nearly lost. Forgiveness isn't easy. It's messy, imperfect, and often incomplete. But it's also necessary. Without it, we remain trapped in our own prisons of anger and regret. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a silent promise to myself. To cherish the people I love, to let go of the past, and to live each day as if it might be my last. Because in the end, forgiveness isn't just about others. It's about freeing ourselves.